I'm Jonathan Tisch, inviting you to discover the secrets behind some of the biggest success stories of our time. Ever wonder about the real person behind the media coverage? Behind the mission statements and quarterly earnings? What inspired their meteoric rise through the corporate stratosphere? What drives them day in and day out? What keeps them ahead of the curve? Find out where these tireless captains of industry are coming from and where they plan to go.
Join me as I chat with my fellow CEOs on an insightful journey beyond the boardroom. Brought to you by Mercedes-Benz E-Class. With most CEOs stressing over the economy, Ron Shaich is opening stores and handing out bonuses. When fast food was burgers and fries, he bet the bank on specialty sandwiches. He's a CEO who goes with his gut and has a multi-billion-dollar business to show for it. Ron, you were born in northern Jersey.
Yes.
And we're sitting in Manhattan, so it's a little bit of a homecoming for you. What were the early years like?
I actually came at this from a very different place. You know, my first way of coming into the world, my first sense of identity was really in anything but business. It was sort of social action. It was politics. It was the 60s, and for me, as a young man, trying to figure out, well, where did I add value in the world? What made a difference? Political action seemed the way. So I was an early McGovern. I was a candidate as a McGovern delegate. I was very active in the anti-war effort, and thought that was where I would end up.
Yeah, I was going to say you thought about a career in politics.
It seemed like the right place to make a difference, but I had an interesting experience along the way. In my sophomore year of college at a place called Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, I was the elected treasurer of the student body, and we got tossed out of a convenience store from across the street. Interestingly enough, I ended up on the board of that convenience store 10 years later, but we were tossed out of a convenience store, and I walked back to campus and I said, let's create our own nonprofit convenience store. We don't need them. And we opened it my junior year, and I ran it, and it was the most fun I ever had. It was the most creative thing I ever did. The only way I can describe it to you, John, maybe you can appreciate it. I don't sing, I don't dance, I have no creative juices in me other than this was art to me, this was sculpture. And I loved it, and it was fascinating.
So what was the decision to leave politics aside and head off to Harvard and join the business school?
Yeah, it was less rooted in leaving it behind. It was trying to figure out, well, how do you make a difference in the world? And I'm not sure that growing up as I did in the 60s, I ever respected business as a place to end up. You know, and it was for me a transformation as I came from understanding politics is a way to make a difference, to understand that the greatest way I can make a difference, the greatest way that I touch people, is in the creativity that I bring as a business person.
You took some of your inheritance from your family, and after Harvard made a conscious decision.
Well, John, my inheritance was probably different than yours. We're talking about...
I'm asking the questions and you're answering them, so you've done pretty well too.
We're talking about $75,000.
Right.
I'll tell you the story. My dad said, we have $250,000 for you. He said, you're going to get it when we pass away. I went to my father and said, I want to create a business. I said, but I'm a little risk averse. I want it in 3 tranches. I want 3 shots with it. And I took $75,000 of it. And we opened a cookie store in downtown Boston. The more interesting part was he also came, he was semi-retired at that time, and he came to Boston 3 days a week and helped me actually start it, which was the greatest and most wonderful gift he could give me.
And what were those early days like in the cookie business?
Well, you have to appreciate this.
I was living in Boston during those days. I actually do remember the cookie store.
Do you really?
Yes.
Unbelievable. Well, you know, it was really interesting, and you have to know how I approach it, which is to say, I didn't know anything about cookies. I knew how to run a cookie store, but I really didn't know anything about it. I just thought there was an extraordinary opportunity to sell cookies with 40,000 people a day going by. And I can remember, I didn't know how to make a cookie. And so I went and started with, literally.
You need a recipe if
right,
you're going to sell cookies.
Well, what do you start with? I started with the Toll House recipe, right? Literally, on the back of the bag. But the point was, all I started with was a commitment. I wanted to create the kind of business I wanted to work in. I wanted to create something that connected with the folks walking by. And I knew if I could try to figure out what it is that they wanted, I could do that. And so
But then you also came to understand that you could connect earlier than noon when maybe somebody wanted a cookie,
sure.
which led into
Yes.
the breakfast business.
And we had 40,000 people a day going by. Nobody bought cookies before 12 noon. And I said to myself, let's put in French baked goods in the morning. And I decided to use a company called Au Bon Pain. I can tell you as a business person, you know which of your vendors are skilled and which aren't. And these guys sometimes billed me, sometimes didn't. To this day, I'm sure I still owe them money. They just never figured it out. They were just completely out of control. And I went to the family that controlled it. This gentleman who later became my partner, Lou Kane. And I basically tried to convince them that the best thing they could do was merge that with my single cookie store.
And then what was the next step to the St. Louis Bread Company?
Oh goodness, it was a long. I'll give it to you sort of in a nutshell. Essentially, in 1981, we created this company of the 3 Au Bon Pains and our 1 cookie store. And I can remember in '84 working in an Au Bon Pain, and a customer came in and said, "I want that baguette." And I said, "Sure." And I said, "You know, how would you like me to slice it?" And they'd say, "Slice it, you know, from top to bottom." And typically we slice bread like this. And I can remember the woman, she pulled out a bag from Stop and Shop, and she threw some luncheon meats on the bread. And you know, you did not have to be a marketing whiz to understand there was an opportunity in sandwiches. And in 1984, we essentially changed Au Bon Pain. And the bet we made was that croissant and bread were not going to be what we actually sold. They were the platform or the basis that gave us permission to sell soup, salad, and sandwiches. And it was a huge success from the beginning. In 1991, we took the company public. We were 100 stores. And between 91 and 93, we did what every public company does, we grew. And I can remember in 93, I could see the limits of it. And I said, let's not be crazy here. Let's not just be like lemmings going off the cliff. Instead of just pressing the accelerator on growth, let's figure out what our core competencies are. What had led to Au Bon Pain's success was that it was a wonderful niche business. It did great in places like Boston, New York, Washington, Chicago, but it wasn't going to play in St. Louis, and it wasn't going to play in Columbus, Ohio. And then in 1993, I was here in New York, and I met a couple of guys that had a 19-store chain in St. Louis called the St. Louis Bread Company. That summer, I went out to visit them, and in November, we bought that chain, and in late 97, we ended up making a decision to sell everything else off and bet it all on that.
Beyond the Boardroom with Jonathan Tisch is brought to you by the all-new 2010 Mercedes-Benz E-Class.
Ron, what's the most intelligent business move that Panera Bread has made recently?
To stay committed to our vision. We had a vision that we wrote in 1994 that remains our vision. We're at about 75% of accomplishing that vision, and we're going to stay with that vision throughout our corporate lives.
This Beyond the Boardroom Insight is brought to you by the all-new, all-intelligent 2010 Mercedes-Benz E-Class.
What I think is interesting is that you've now acquired all these companies and you have this new brand, and I know that you did struggle a little bit with the board and had to convince them that this was a good strategy.
Yeah, by 97, it was so clear the power of this brand we had called St. Louis Bread Company. And we began to believe there was a phenomenon playing out called decommodification. By the early 90s, people began to wake up and say, I want to feel different in a world in which everything is the same. Every Route 1 is the same, every mall is the same. And I'm not just talking domestically, I'm talking internationally. I grew up in New Jersey. There was Rheingold beer, there was a local coffee roaster, there was a local soft drink roaster. The mantra in corporate America between 1950 and 1990 was dominate your category, be number 1, 2, or 3, or get the heck out. Driven by, Harvard Business School, GE.
Post World War II, and
it was a time in which every single major consumer category was consolidated. You think about coffee, Folgers and Maxwell House had 90% market share. Soft drinks, Coke and Pepsi, 90% plus market share. And every reaction draws reaction, and that's a trend. And the real effort to me in business is understanding what those underlying trends are. If you'd come to my house 10 years ago for coffee, it was Friday night dinner, we would open a can of Folgers. Now, if you come to our house for Friday night dinner, if we don't use our $3,000 espresso machine, some way we're insulting you. You know, the prevailing norms in the early 90s where the only people cared about quality and real food, and the quality of their food, the quality of their ingredients was New York, Boston, and San Francisco. And the reality is people care all over this country. They may go to fast food, but they held their noses and they didn't feel good about it. And we began to say, if we can create food that people respected, served by people you respect, that speaks to your own self-respect, there was an extraordinary opportunity.
But these were very difficult decisions, and you've commented that, quote, that these were not happy times, that the stock was under some pressure, the board was a little bit slow in understanding what you wanted to accomplish.
These were generally happy times for this one division of this company that had 4 divisions. And I can remember I'm back in the Caribbean, it's Christmas time, and I'm sitting there and I'm kind of down. And I remember talking to some folks that I knew, and they said, "Ron, why are you down?" I said, "You know, we have this unbelievably powerful thing. St. Louis Bread Company, renamed Panera Bread, that was doing extraordinarily well. And the truth is, for every 100 concepts in America, one ever becomes a nationally dominant brand. This has the potential. And the truth is, we're going to screw it up. It won't get the financial resources it needs. And frankly, the management that's running it doesn't have a clue what's going to hit them and what growth is really about." And his friend looked at me and said, "You know, what would you do if Panera Bread owned Au Bon Pain? Au Bon Pain didn't own Panera Bread." I said, "You know what? This is the gem. If I were smart, I would sell everything off, bet it all on this thing, personally get involved with it, you know, on a day-to-day basis and make it happen." And I started thinking about it. Then I said, "Why didn't I do that?" Now, in retrospect, it looks like a brilliant decision. Going through it, it was the most painful decision of my life. And it was complicated by the fact that my board didn't necessarily agree with the decision. The board, as constructed, consisted of myself and my father, Lou Kane and his father, and 3 venture capitalists. And my father was dying of cancer in one hospital in Boston. Lou was dying of cancer, or going through a process that led to his death by cancer at another hospital. And now the board was 3 venture capitalists, me and a 90-year-old. And there was a lot of push and shove relative to the decision to sell the namesake brand and bet it all on something that was significantly smaller in St. Louis.
Big bet.
Yes, big bet. And but to me,
were there times where you'd go home and say, I just can't believe that this is going to have a happy ending? Or were you positive and optimistic through the entire process?
There were many moments where you know, in life you always wonder how it plays out. It's only when they write the history that it seems, you know, simple and clean. If you're not self-reflective, you're not human.
Beyond the Boardroom with Jonathan Tisch is brought to you by the all-new 2010 Mercedes-Benz E-Class.
During these very difficult economic times,
Yes.
You're adding stores,
Yeah,
you're adding coworkers,
yeah,
you've been giving bonuses.
yeah.
How is that possible?
Well,
What makes you different?
We've had great success. I mean, our stock was up 50% in the height of this recession. You know, we're contrarian. And my view, first off, I need to give you some background, which is to say, we came to the recession understanding that a recession at some point would come, which is to say that we've had a pristine balance sheet, we've got no debt, a bunch of cash, we have got a track record with our investors that's as strong as you can get. We've got now 10 years of being the best performing stock in the restaurant universe, bar no one. Starbucks, Yum, Wendy's, McDonald's, bar no one, over this last decade. And so you take that credibility and you go into a recession. Our view of recession is this is the time to build long-term competitive position. There is no better time. You know, great fortunes were made in the last depression, and this is the time that great companies will get made. So what that's meant in this recession is to increase the quality. What that's meant in this recession is to continue growing. No better time. Real estate prices are down, occupancy and and construction costs are down. And this is a time to add people.
Have you guys made any mistakes, or are there decisions over the past few years that you regret?
You know, my whole sense is that there are many decisions I regret. I wouldn't be me, and I wouldn't be self-reflective if I didn't have regrets. Having said that, I created this. I essentially founded this, co-founded it. So in many ways, I'm as much an entrepreneur as I am a manager. And what I think sometimes people misunderstand about guys like me is they say, you seek risk, you're a risk taker. Baloney. I'm as risk averse as you get. To me, I care so deeply about this. I feel such a sense of responsibility to the 50,000 people that work here. I feel such a sense of responsibility to the, almost $2 billion of investment capital in here. I feel a sense of responsibility to the legacy and to the vision. And my sense of that is I will take no actions that will ultimately blow this thing up. And so the challenge is not that we ever made a mistake. The challenge is that we don't want to take risks that we can't manage and handle. And I don't think we've really bet the company ever. And I think the fact that we're still standing here strong and tall 30 years into this gives some voice to that.
Along those same lines, one of the toughest things that you've noted is that during periods of growth,
Yes.
sometimes senior managers have to say no.
In many ways, being the adult in a business is making certain that when people are feeling that they're unbeatable and nothing can stop them, when they're extrapolating on yesterday's Excel spreadsheet and running it out for the next 30 years, that there is huge risk out there and they have to take responsibility for protecting whatever they have into the future. On the other hand, when people are down and they feel like the world is falling apart, that's the time to bring them up. And so to me, really what leadership is bringing truth in from outside, bringing the reality of the marketplace, bringing the reality of the customer, telling the truth and not letting the organization lie to itself, and then ultimately stepping up and joining with senior management and making certain bets, because the really valuable bets only play out over multiple years.
Sounds like you're a bit of an anomaly for a CEO of a public company, that there's the pressure of the quarterly earnings report.
Yes.
But you have such a long-term vision for what you're trying to create. Is that sort of a dichotomy that you go through in terms of your management?
No, they actually link directly. I'm very keenly aware that the short-term results are what gives me the credibility to actually play out our medium and long-term goals and our views of where the world is going. And I will say to you, my own view, the biggest challenges for our financial system and corporate culture today is this focus on short-term as the end-all and be-all. People talk about who's the cause for this financial meltdown. My view, we are. And what do I mean by that? We take our money, our 401ks and our IRAs, and we put pressure on our money managers, and we'll hop across the street for another half a point of return. What do you think that does? That puts pressure on these management teams for short-term results. We live in a world today where if I can get the stock up 5%, I will sell out all the constituencies and stakeholders other than the investors. We end up with management teams that are then bonused on short-term results. They optimize on what matters. And is it any wonder that we have folks taking inordinate risks like we saw in AIG and the big investment banks? What we need as a society is to make a determination that we actually want a reward for medium and long-term performance. And I think we would have a far better society if we really came from that position.
So a word that's used to describe you a lot is passion. That you're passionate about your business. You're passionate about your caring for your coworkers. You're passionate about the customer experience.
Yes.
Is that an apt adjective?
I've heard that word used in reference to me often, but I actually think there may be a better word. I'm intense, right? I mean, you go through life once. I want to go through this thing, and I want to do it in a way in which I respect. There are many nights I'll be on a plane at 2 in the morning. I'll say, what am I doing here? And then I'll realize I'm doing this because I want my children. I want my children to see somebody who has passion, who has interest, who has excitement about what they do. One of the things that's most fun for me is to watch my 10-year-old son come and work in a Panera. And he's 10 years old, you know, and he's working at the counter. And, you know, I mean, it touches me because I get so much joy from this. I enjoy watching them. You know, having said that, I'm not sure that I will do this the rest of my life. You know, this is a fascinating set of experiences. Life is a journey. I very much enjoy it, but you know, there may be an opportunity to help figure out other problems someday.
You tempted to go back to your earlier love affair with politics?
Well, you know, in many ways, my sense of a business is it's a little society. And you know, you have reward systems that are the equivalent of tax policy, and you have what rules you're going to follow, and you have to figure out what makes that society work. I've found it fascinating playing it out within this little world that I have called Panera. I do think that there are significant challenges in our broader society, and I actually think about it a great deal. How do you make a difference in the broader society? And I continue to think about how do I do that? So I don't really know the answer. I do know that I love figuring things out, and I would love to continue to try to figure them out in other places and spheres that interest me.
Do you think your father would think that his $75,000 in his son Ron was a good investment?
Oh, I think even my critical father would say this was a good show, son. He passed away about 10 years ago, so he didn't get a chance to really see it in its fruition. But I know that even when he passed away, he knew what this was, and he basically knew who I was.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.